As we traveled from State Route 127 and came around on our bicycles, we were traveling on two roads. One of those roads was Fear Not Mill Road and West Elkton Road. The reason that these roads have the names that they have been given has to do with historical significance, and I will get to those two names here in just a moment. First of all, I want to bring your attention to the mill that is behind me. This mill was a grain mill, and it was built by a man by the name of Ritter, and the mill was built to provide the farmers and the families who lived in this area with many of the supplies that they would have needed once the area began to grow. We're just outside of 7 Mile, and the road that we are on is actually West Elkton Road, and when we cross the railroad right there, it will be Mill Street, and Mill Street would take us on up to 7 Mile Elementary School. This mill would have been in operation in the late 1800s and mid to late 1800s, when the village of 7 Mile and the surrounding areas were a very large agricultural area and many farms and many families around here. As you look at the mill, you can see some interesting architectural designs about it. When the mill would have been built, and the purpose of the mill would be to grind corn or grind up oats or wheat, any kind of grains that the farmers and their families would have needed to make breads and cake and anything they would have needed in that regard. So the mill was built for that purpose. It was run with water, and the water was provided by 7 Mile Creek, which is behind us there along the tree line. The mill would have had what is called a mill race, R-A-C-E, a mill race. The mill race would have been basically a big ditch that would have been cut from the creek and coming along toward and headed in the direction of the mill. And then on the back side of the mill, there would have been a wheel. This is a picture not of the 7 Mile mill, but a similar one that would just to kind of give you an idea of how the mill would have run. This water would have come down out of a big trough, fallen onto a wheel, and made the wheel go round and round and round to drive the gears on the inside. And then there would have been big stones called grindstones, and they roll around, and that helps the corn. It would just get the corn ground up for the use. So this would have been a typical mill of the 1800s. So when the water would come down the mill race out of 7 Mile Creek and come along the backside of the mill into the wheel, and the water then would have just run on down, and at that point then run down probably into the spring that is 5 Mile Spring, which is just over here on the other side of the road. We'll talk more about that at our next stop. But this mill was called the 7 Mile Mill, and this bag is an actual bag that Mr. Ritter, who was the owner, M.F. Ritter is his name, that Mr. Ritter would have used to put ground corn, ground wheat, ground oats, whatever the farmers and the families needed, he would have used and put in one of these bags. And this is an actual bag from his mill. His slogan is the pride of Butler. And as we've talked during the day, we should remember that Butler is Butler County, the pride of Butler County. And Butler County, of course, being named for Richard Butler, General Richard Butler. And we'll hear more about Richard Butler as we proceed to our next stop. a beautiful, lovely gold seal with grain, a bundle of wheat there as his symbol, also on the mill, on the bag that he would have used from his mill. This is quite an antique, and it was given to me by the lady who lived in that house, Mrs. Hamill, at the time, and she gave me this bag. There were a few left, and I was lucky enough to get one, and my father framed it for me. It's one of my prized possessions of 7 Mile. Prior to the 7 Mile mill, we're going to go back a number of years, back to a time when 7 Mile was not such a cozy little place to live. We're going to talk about the reason that Fear Not Mill Road is called Fear Not Mill Road. Fear Not Mill comes directly off of Route 127 and makes the curve down along 7 Mile and 4 Mile Creeks, down along the way there. In 1816, there was a man by the name of Joseph Watson, and Joseph lived in that Camden and Trenton, New Jersey area that we have referred to earlier through the day as we've been talking. And Joseph lived there, and he owned a lumber mill. With a lumber mill, once again, a lumber mill would have been just his business in which he took logs and he cut them and he made furniture, tables and chairs and desks and boards to build houses with and boards to build wagons with. Anything that a person needed a board for, they could go to Joseph Watson and get a board or a wagon load of boards because he owned a lumber mill. As we've talked earlier, we know that the area that we are living in here, in the time of the pioneers, we referred to it as a jungle of just trees. There were no open fields that we see surrounding us here. It was just a virtual jungle of huge, enormous trees. If you ran a business in which you knew how to cut lumber, cut trees into boards, coming to a place that there were enormous trees to cut boards would be just kind of like a dream. So Joseph Watson in 1816, this would have been quite some years, number of years after the Revolutionary War, and he was probably very likely that he had a father or grandfather that may have fought in the war. And he heard stories about wanting to come out to the Ohio country. So Joseph decided that he was going to sell his business and come into Ohio. When Joseph made that decision, all of his friends said, "Oh, Joseph, that's not a good idea. You are going to go out there and you're going to get hurt. You're going to get killed." The Indians, once again, by 1816, the treaties that had been signed by General Anthony Wayne in the 1790s, those treaties were breaking down, and the Indians had just been pushed too far, and they were uprising again, and they were fighting, and they were killing the settlers, and it was a dangerous, dangerous place to live here in what is now just our village of 7 Mile and all the outlying areas. So when Joseph decided to leave New Jersey and come to this area, he was leaving a comfortable, safe life and coming to this area. When they told him he should not come, when his friends told him, "You're going to go out there and get killed," he said, "I'm not afraid. I'm going." So when he got out here, he built his mill back here along 7 Mile Creek, and he named his mill Fear Not Mill. How ingenious. What a great way of saying to his friends, "I'm doing it anyway, and here I am, and I'm starting a new life." So his mill, which no longer exists, but it was back in that area there along 7 Mile Creek, not far from where 7 Mile Creek and 4 Mile Creek join at an area called currently known as the Champion Camping Club, if any of you are familiar with that area. But it's a very beautiful area back where the two creeks come together. And that is where Joseph Watson built his mill in 1816. As we've talked about General Anthony Wayne and General Arthur St. Clair, we've talked about that they used this area was how they proceeded with their armies to move from one area, from what originally was Fort Hamilton, and they moved north into other areas of Ohio to fight the Indians. And when they left Hamilton around 1791 and in 1793, and they marched north, their armies actually marched right across 7 Mile Creek and 4 Mile Creek, right through what is now St. Clair Township, named, of course, for General Arthur St. Clair. And once again, our area is so full of history, and we are sitting right on top of American history and don't even sometimes realize it because it's just become a day-to-day thing. But we are just living in the area where George Washington sent armies through here to fight the Indians and make this area settled, that white settlers could move in here. We're going to get back on our bicycles now and travel up Spring Road, and when it dead ends into State Route 127, also known as the Anthony Wayne Parkway, we will cross the road and at that location have a great deal more to know, more to learn about Arthur St. Clair, Richard Butler, Anthony Wayne, and the settlement of Ohio.